All right, before I introduce the rest of our panelists, since we have a relatively small group, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. So, Will, do you have a mic?
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Quarles. I am from Siemens.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pavan from Unilever.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is James. I'm from SAS Software. We do analytics for smart cities.
Hello, my name is Bill Ainsley. I'm with Exelon Generation.
Hi, my name is Naveen Kulkarni, and I'm here from Infor, representing their enterprise asset management solution.
Hi, Cindy Duco, also with Infor.
Hi, Odelia Hernandez, Miami-Dade County.
I'm Constantino from Accenture Brazil, Industry X.tool.
Thank you.
Hi, Renato from Accenture Brazil.
Thank you.
Hello, Jan Monkeel, oil and gas business.
Hi there, Kyle Thompson from Eli Lilly and Company Pharmaceuticals.
Hi, Bart Gazarowski here from Fortress Information Security here in Orlando.
Andre Restaino, I'm Managing Director of the ISA Security Compliance Institute. We do ISA secure cybersecurity certifications for control systems in traditional process industries and building management systems.
This is Mahesh Saroj from L&T Technology Services.
David Kramer from Ford Motor Company.
Thank you, everyone. Well, I'm Jim Frazier, and I do have a background in a little bit of background in the lighting world. I've written for the U.S. Department of Transportation the Communications Interface Standard for street lighting, revenue grade electric metering, ground fault equipment, electric vehicle charging, and automated demand response for the U.S. DOT. Those kinds of standards are important because the U.S. government will reimburse you on lighting projects up to 50% if you follow their guidance. I'm also the chairman of the Illuminating Engineering Society's largest technical standards group, the Roadway Lighting Committee. We meet in March in Washington, D.C., if you want to join us there. To the right of me, we already met Larry Sepos of Sesco. Alongside him is Greg Carter of Acuity, Suzanne Seidinger of Signify, Chris Davis of Simcon, and rounding out is Charles Ramdat, the smart city leader for the city of Orlando. We've already heard from Larry. So let's go down the line, and Greg, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what's important about smart lighting.
All right, great. Can you guys hear us up here? So I'm Greg Carter. I lead the software business for Acuity Brands. I've been with Acuity for about 2.5 years. I came over from Cisco, and I ran the professional services group for IoT for Cisco for about 5 years. And what I got excited about coming over to Acuity is, we've been trying to solve lots of interesting problems in IoT at Cisco. And we found that one of the things that was holding us back was that there was such a large investment that customers had to make in communication technology in order to start the flow of data and to start figuring out what those use cases were that they could then prove out the ROI on. So it's a big leap of faith to make a huge investment before you can really prove out that it's going to pay you back. And so what I think is interesting in the world of lighting, I think we're going to hopefully talk about a balance between the lighting indoors and the lighting outdoors, primarily street lights. But in both cases, you're talking about an existing network, especially as Jim was talking about, we're moving into the world of LED and lighting controls. So we have these networks that are being put in place for control. And sensors are being put in place, at least initial sets of sensors. And so it becomes a network that we can piggyback on with very little cost, especially with the energy savings that we're getting from the investment in the initial capital outlay. And so you're able to leapfrog that whole communication infrastructure to start getting data flowing to much more rapidly develop the use cases that ultimately will pay for future upgrades down the road. So what we've been doing at Acuity, we've been focusing more in the indoor space, but we're building out sensors, radios, different kinds of networking technology into light fixtures, and using that for sure to benefit the building operators in terms of more efficient operation of the building, but also for the occupants inside the buildings. And so taking some of that data to solve problems like understanding utilization of indoor space to be able to cut the costs of the space, providing services to occupants like wayfinding, indoor navigation, asset tracking, things like that, all based on the lighting networks. So that's what we're doing, and I'm looking forward to discussing with the other panelists what's possible.
Thanks. Suzanne.
Thanks, Larry, and thanks to ARC Advisory Group for having us here today and for highlighting lighting. Not often does lighting get such a great platform, and I think the reason is that it is one of the biggest enablers for IoT, and it's one of the greatest catalysts for the implementation, like Greg alluded to. I work for Signify. We're the largest global lighting company in the world, present in all across the globe, really looking at indoor and outdoor environments and at the continuity of that experience as those light sources all become digital. So it's really about taking that enormous ubiquity and omnipresence and really trying to think about what that means, that granularity and that potential that's encapsulated within that granularity. So when you look at it, though, for real, the transition towards connected is, we're sort of on the cusp of a big shift. Maybe 2 to 5% of outdoor lights are connected today, but in the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, we're going to see that snowball into a much, much larger installation base. And with that comes the ability to unlock new use cases. And that's in particular what I'm interested in and what we're interested in is understanding what comes from having streetlight density of data. So we've done a lot of work in collaboration with municipalities like Los Angeles, looking at, for example, nuisance use cases from noise, or say trucks parking in locations where they shouldn't be, or construction vehicles traveling through residential streets where they shouldn't be. There's no way in the past where you could have had an ROI around having a sensor in that residential street. But with the transition to LEDs, with the density and the affordability that brings, suddenly you can actually implement this and facilitate use cases that have real value to city planners, citizens, and the private sector who can build off of that data. So, I really look forward to the rest of the panel and talking about how these things can be unlocked.
That's great. Chris.
Wow, Suzanne, you rock, girl. What to say?
Hey, it's late in the day.
So my name is Chris Davis. I'm VP of Smart Cities at SimCom. I would define myself as a businessman who is passionate about being a smart cities practitioner. And what I'd like to do is highlight a use case that kind of elaborates on what Greg and Suzanne were talking about. So we have a partnership with Inmarsat. Does anybody know them, the satellite communications company? And they are trying to deploy machine-to-machine and IoT infrastructure projects across Africa. And obviously one of the foundations is smart and connected lighting. So if I were to say to you, one of the most interesting use cases that came out of our work with them was homework, what do you think that would mean? Think homework now, right? We all did it when we were growing up, going to school. Any ideas?
Someone
Can't do homework without light.
have a guess.
Okay, so you can't do homework without light. Right. So we put a pilot in Rwanda with Inmarsat and a local lighting manufacturer in Rwanda called Sahasra. They're an Indian company. And This was in conjunction with a Smart Africa Alliance ministerial meeting back in May of last year. There are 24 countries that belong to this, and it's all about economic development and betterment of Africa. And so it was decided that we would do, Inmarsat would do a lighting control pilot using the Sahasra luminaires and our controls near the conference venue, which happened to be right across the street from the presidential palace. So it was kind of a commercial thing, right? And there's a project sort of sitting out there for 42,000 streetlights and controls. So, we as a control supplier and smart city guy were interested. But what they decided to do was to take and put some LED streetlights along a rural highway out in the country. And they put in the LEDs and they put in controls, and guess what happened? Homework. So if I say homework, what would that mean? So what happened is that the villages and houses along this rural highway did not have electricity. And so the children, instead of doing their homework at home with a gas lantern or candles, would go out under the street lights and do their homework at night. So you can imagine these children of all ages, they grab their book bag, a little chair, they pull it out, and they're underneath the street lights, and they said, okay, we're going to do our homework because we can see. So that changed the control strategy, that when during homework hours, we're going to make those lights full on bright so the kids can see. And then the other thing that happened was that the gateway, which these streetlight controllers talked to, had cellular backhaul, and the cell service out there sucked. It was awful. And so Inmarsat said, we'll just put a satellite dish out here, and we'll have the communications between the gateway go over satellite instead of a cellular network. And they said, okay, if we're going to do that, why don't we put in public Wi-Fi? So now we have kids that are now connected to the internet. So it's about accessibility, digital equity. And so this was all enabled by smart and connected lighting infrastructure as a starting point. And so when you look at this whole space, you've got to think about what are the possibilities. And if you sort of fast forward to like the end of last year, this whole village where these 20 or 30 streetlights has had this resurgence of economic activity. They've now put in solar and battery storage to power the streetlights, to power other devices. So the possibilities are endless, and I think we as practitioners in this space have to figure out what is the art of the possible that can be enabled by smart and connected lighting inside buildings and outdoors. My 2 cents worth. Charles, take it away. Oh yeah, you need the mic, right?
These are all tough acts to follow.
I know, Charles, I'll interrupt you because I've got a question here. Describe your most unusual, interesting smart city use case. This guy hit it out of the park, so I can't use that question.
He's got some good ones. I know. Go for it, Charles.
You want me to answer that question?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll answer that question. So, in Florida, our geography is such that we have ponds and lakes all over the place. And this is really unused real estate. And someone came up with the idea to put floating solar arrays on some of these ponds. And geez, it's a revolution. And you're able to power all kinds of things with these. So we're testing the effectiveness of these before taking them full on to scale. But we hope that's going to be revolutionary in Florida and in other places where we have great sunshine, really affecting the use of electricity on large campuses, universities and so on, and in areas where we need to provide lighting for parks and so on that are pretty remote and may not have much use, and you may not usually be able to make the business case to have certain facilities in those types of parks. Really, they can be very urban or very suburban, the two extremes that you need these. And I think that's a great thing that we've come up with in the last year. So I hope
Wow,
That's cool.
That's
cool.
unique.
Yeah, so we jokingly call it photovoltaics. And some of Denise's peers at Siemens know about this. And we're working that right now with the Orlando Utilities Commission and with the University of Central Florida, our hometown university, And this kind of collaboration was made a little bit easier because the Metro Lab partnership, UCF and City of Orlando are one of the Metro Lab partner teams, about 40 of them nationally now. It came out of the smart cities catalysts that were created in the Obama administration.
Okay.
Not to be political, it just happened that way. So it was happening in previous administrations too, but it really came together in the last 6 years or so. So
That's a good one.
to follow on with this group, you know, I'm with government, and folks have this crazy idea that government folks are not innovative and are lazy and all those types of things. I'm here to tell you, I used to work 10 and 12-hour days before I retired from City of Orlando. I'm a consultant to them now. I have a City of Orlando email address and everything. But we really, and I know a lot of colleagues in other governments, we're really concerned about service delivery, really concerned about who our stakeholders are. What do our stakeholders care about? What are their challenges? For us here in Orlando, we have the world's largest tourist market, right? So we're a metro area of about 3 million. In 2017, we had 72 million visitors. So you get the challenge, right? Right off, we rent more cars here than anywhere else in the world. Something bad happens to a tourist here, it's immediately on TV or on internet in Tokyo, Paris, London, Rio, Beijing. And you know what that means? That it's damage to our brand. We have billions of dollars invested in the tourist industry here. So one of the biggest challenges for us is to make sure that on a proactive basis that we have adequate safety and security for our visitors and our residents too. We don't want to forget our residents, right? And so one of the things we can do is provide lighting. So I was a public works guy and transportation guy, did smart cities stuff in transportation, but one of the basics is lighting. And I had the lighting, street lighting under my portfolio. And I tell you, the police and I'd get together and we said, we had this wonderful camera system at night, and we picked up that bad guy, Chris. We didn't know it was Chris, but we picked up that bad guy mugging that lady. We couldn't tell what color shirt he was wearing. You know, it was a glare, it's a yellow light, you know. And so to get practical, you know, we had to bring technology on an affordable and available, sustainable basis to deal with these challenges, to make sure that we could avert some of these things. And if we didn't avert them, that we could respond quickly and then get the word out that we did something about, we caught the bad guy, and we could prevent future crimes. So it gets as basic as that with streetlights. Before we got there with the streetlights, though, and to be able to make the business case to be able to change out streetlights, we started with traffic signals, right? And I, like I said, had that portfolio, and we were getting guys out of bed at night to go change bulbs. And we did the calculation that we could save tons of money by changing to LED traffic lights.
On the traffic signal heads.
Traffic signal heads. And then we took the savings and we applied to other things. And we were one of the first cities in the world to have countdown traffic signals everywhere. Improve traffic safety, pedestrian safety, right? We took that savings, we put back into other things that were related. With streetlights right now, we're hoping to take some of those savings and then put into a myriad of sensors that we could deploy. Now, there are so many sensors, from gunshot detection to air quality sensors. We're doing a great automated vehicle project partnership in Central Florida. One of the proving grounds nationally is here that we put together, proud to say. And we're hoping that some of the technologies that can be embedded with streetlights can help us get going on future automated vehicle travel. Or if not that, what about just driver information and communication with vehicles, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to peds, and so on, okay? I have an uncle in New York City who is blind. And he comes down here pretty often and he thinks we're primitive in many ways with the way we deal with pedestrians. And so now I've taken that lesson. We're trying to work with folks like Lighthouse Central Florida to see if we can do some things with the new enabling technologies with LED lights, using the foundational communications for the LED controls and so on, to springboard to use for safety, for pedestrians, all right, for wayfinding, for transit information, and all these types of things. So I don't want to preach a whole lot, but I just tell you that there's some innovation going on in governments all across America, and street lights are almost central to many smaller communities, especially getting into that revolution and using, sometimes not high-speed communications, sometimes it's lower-speed communications, but just being able to co-locate different sensors, different controls with streetlights is changing lifestyles, making America more livable. So,
That's great.
Excellent, Charles.
thank you.
That's great. Wow, that was a great first round. I heard some great things there. Let me touch on sustainability because that's what I do. There are three pillars of sustainability, and the first is preserving or enhancing the natural environment, the physical environment that we live in. So that's air quality and all those kinds of things. The second is preserving and enhancing the human quality of life, safety, all those type of issues. But the third, and it's the one that's very easily forgotten, is to do the first two in an economically reasonable manner, which tends to mean a fairly quick payback. So we're here talking about lighting, and if I put on my adversarial hat on, I could say, I already if I buy an LED street light, it already now lasts 5 times longer than my old light bulb and saves 80% of the energy. Why do I need to buy controls? So if controls are an add-on, where do I start? What's the lowest hanging fruit? And I know it's different by market. I know that, in an interior commercial space, you might want to know what customers are doing. In a pedestrian crosswalk, you might want to do something else, but still know where those people are going, but not necessarily who they are. If you're a driver, you might want to, or on a roadway application, you might want to have adjustable color, so there's better visual acuity at some times of the day. Some of those are way out, some are nearer term. So why don't we go down the row and try to give me an example or 2 or 3 from each of you about what's the lowest hanging fruit that can be done today, and which one's the whole promise for maybe a little farther out? We can go either way.
I'll start. And I'll take the most obvious one is, usually people tell me I don't need a microphone. The most obvious one is especially with street lighting, is for maintenance. By putting some form of connected node on top of a fixture, it's giving some feedback, even if it's not accumulating or backhauling information from other IoT devices within a system. It's at least providing information as to what's going on with the light fixture. Is it operable? Does it need repair? So I know, for instance, many municipalities do, but Miami-Dade Expressway, that we've changed out all the lights on, they have 2 trucks. They used to have 2 trucks that were running 24/7, going back and forth up and down the highway, just checking to see if light bulbs were out. And then they would go back, and then they would drive back to the shop, get what they needed to repair it, and come back. So maintenance and the savings that comes from that alone, a connected device will transmit all that information back to home base, so they only go out when they're needed to do something that's needed with the equipment that they have that's needed. That would probably be the most easy answer. So I'm going to take that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I guess I'd say I think it falls into three categories. The first is what can you do with a connected system to cut the total installed cost of the actual lighting retrofit you're doing, or if it's new construction. So that's the first area to tackle. If you can solve it there, then you've completely removed the barrier to doing everything else that comes beyond that. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And just an example of that is being able to do a health check once you finish the install. So you can really routinize the process of installing the fixture, but use the connectivity technology to allow the installer to be able to check to make sure that it doesn't have a bad driver, that everything's been installed correctly. The second step is to go on to ongoing service contracts, or maintenance in general. So like what Larry just said. And that can apply in an indoor space or an outdoor space. So if you can do something that's going to cut the cost of maintaining either the direct system or the related building systems or things that are tied to the streetlight, that's the next thing. And I think if we're working even moderately hard at coming up with the right economic model, you can solve it on those two first, the total installed cost or the ongoing maintenance of the lighting system itself. But where the real benefits are going to pay back is now that you've got a network in place, what are all the other business processes that can be affected by that, right? So, and I talked a little bit when I first introduced what we're doing at Acuity. The thing is that third phase, you're never going to, those are typically going to be different stakeholder groups that are not tied to the lighting purchase or even the maintenance of the lighting system. And it's very difficult to get them coordinated with the people who are doing the lighting project to be able to create an economic model that weighs all of that, especially since we're still pretty new in the smart cities or the smart indoor spaces, and we don't have those ROI models completely nailed down yet. So my recommendation is always that you focus on the core lighting project and ongoing maintenance first. Make sure that the cost of the communication infrastructure is covered on that. And that gives you the runway to then work with all the other stakeholders and the software companies and the complex ecosystems with sensor manufacturers that you're going to have to pull together to be able to prove out the other benefits that come from it.
Sorry. No worries. Well, I want to add some color to some of the maintenance discussion that you guys raised, because I think just to kind of bring it home a little bit more, a lot of cities or utilities will get up to 6 calls about an outage, and that may be from the police having to shoot out the light or something, some other reason why there's been damage other than something wrong with a fixture. But that might cost 6 calls, right? Imagine we're all busy people. We see something during the day, but we're civically minded, so we call in at the end of the day, right, to say to the municipality, to the 311 number, and we put in the call. On average, there's about 6 calls. If you don't have IoT data to verify that, say, the fix has happened, you have to go out and verify 6 times. And you have no quick way of actually giving feedback to the citizens that you acted on their input. I think we underestimate the value of the ability to feedback to the folks who you need to make the service transparent to, that you've actually acted on their input, that you've leveraged their actual energy that they've spent calling in about something that's not their job, right? So I think that has an immense value that can add to the overall thought behind the asset management and the maintenance piece. The other example, and that's based on information from cities like Baltimore and Boston and other places. Another thought too, when you have third-party service providers, the city of Buenos Aires went through this, where they actually connected data from third-party service providers with their back office, and they used the IoT data to verify that the work had actually happened before paying those service providers. And there had been initially a lot of problems, let's say, happening at that point, where work had been completed on paper but not in real life, which led to public safety concerns. But then there was no way to actually go back and really backtrack and untangle all that. So connecting the systems of record of a city, the payment piece, with the infrastructure is not a trivial value. So I really want to kind of highlight those pieces.
Well, so that's fascinating. I didn't think about the cost of processing those 6 calls about that one streetlight outage. Because one person says, oh, it's out, it's the light by the gas station. The other one says it's at the corner of 5th and Main.
Exactly.
It's by the firehouse, and it's all the same streetlight.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And then I guess I just want to close out. I mean, you're talking about value and sort of bigger picture. I mean, bigger picture, things that are at stake are public safety, working with City of Baltimore, looking at their actual public safety statistics and picking locations that were most important to the community, actually, based on public safety concerns that had been raised.
Okay.
So when you start adding in that you're impacting those areas that have, the most concerns and overlapping layers of data, that's when you really get additional value. And that's, I think, where the future promise is, when you take, say, public safety data, transportation data, and the ability to impact the lighting, and you overlay that, not necessarily in the same system. You can do that at a higher level, but then using those insights to really make decisions about how you want to run your infrastructure. I think that's where the true payoff comes.
Yeah, I think to build on what Greg and Suzanne just talked about, somebody used the term co-located earlier. And so really what you're talking about here is, once you have the smart and connected lighting deployed, what else can you do to take advantage of that prior investment? And the possibilities, like the homework, I think, are endless. We were introduced to an idea that I thought was pretty clever. Came from a mayor in New York. And he had a problem with zombies in town. Okay? Zombies, yeah. Yeah, we kind of did the same thing. Is this guy on drugs or what? He said, I get the smart street lighting, I get the energy, I get the sustainability, I get the asset management, but I've got 1,000 zombie buildings in town. So these are unpowered, vacant buildings of which there is no way to traditionally monitor them. And he said, unfortunately, we had 2 burned down near City Hall. It's not good for my brand, and it's not good for votes. So what can you guys do? So we came up with an idea of developing a battery-powered fire alarm, smoke, and audio detector that could go into the buildings, a couple of them per building, and run on the same street lighting controlling network. So it's an early warning system for the fire department. And that was cool. So there's a public safety element to that. And then the mayor also said, well, if I have that in place, I'm going to charge the property owner, the mortgage holder, the lien holder, whoever it is, $50 a month monitoring fee. So 50 times 1,000 times 12, what's that, like $600,000 additional revenue? So again, you got to think outside the box. What are the possibilities? What are the problems I have to solve that these street light controller networks that are in place that do all the other things we talked about can provide added value? So that would be my extension to your talks.
I'm learning so much from all the sharing. It's so good that I'm up here listening. I have a lot to take back. I'll just add, though, that for us, the foundational elements of a smart city are 2. First is stakeholder engagement. The second is the information communications technology, also promoted by the Smart Cities Council as the 2 things we've got to consider basic, we've got to focus on. And so we have taken those to heart. And so we consider the underlying communications network to be the most important thing that we can do with this smart lighting. So, like you're building a house or whatever, you build a good solid foundation that's robust, right? And once it's robust, you can build the first 2 floors when you're ready. You can add on and put some fancy design on it. Put a big tower on top of it. So do that all at different times, but you must have that solid foundation, and you must make sure that foundation is protected. And that's the most basic thing for us, because we see being able to springboard from that, like fiber network system that we're having, as a robust, redundant, reliable, resilient system if it gets damaged. We see that as being basic to facilitating the communications that we're doing today, to facilitating 5G that's coming, to facilitating 6 and 7 and 8G that the National Science Foundation is envisioning to take us through the rest of the 21st century, right? But we won't be able to do all those things or a lot of the things we're doing now if we don't put in that real good foundation and make sure it's solid. So that's our focus.
Well, Charles, I agree with you. I think there's two foundational points you made there. One is stakeholder engagement, and it's extremely important to reach out, define all your stakeholder communities very broadly, with a lot of granularity, even down to the bicyclist community and the little village business community, taxpayers, elected officials, the police department, public workers, the outside contractors that might touch all these things, and a plethora of others. You need to reach out to them, get their user needs, and see where there's consensus. And that consensus is then what builds your project. So that was your first foundational piece. The next one is that communications backbone. And in a previous session, I phrased this question as just interoperability versus proprietary systems. But in the street lighting world, it's a bit more intricate, let's say, because I don't think, we have a lot of different, quite small, low bandwidth technologies that are out there. Some are a little bit higher. There's all the telecoms are involved in this as well. 5G is coming. So I mean, we don't have to go down the line. Anyone can answer this in any order. But can I watch a YouTube video from every streetlight in my neighborhood next week?
Do you want to?
There might be a stakeholder that wants that. But the question is, so what do I choose? There's very low power, LoRa, long distance technologies that might only give me small amounts of data very infrequently. Then there's ones that are a little faster with a little more bandwidth. And then there's, at the other end of the continuum, fiber. And in the middle, there's the cell phone companies. And there's cable companies that use LoRa. And so how do I, as a public works director, make heads or tails of any of this?
So what I would say is go back to making sure the foundation is okay. And then make sure your system is agile enough so that you might be even able to go out and temporarily deploy things that connect to that network in places where you may need to have a big event in a park. Or you need to have a little bit added service for, a marathon for public safety purposes, or, if you're going to have ongoing things for maybe a year or two, make sure that you have some, plug and play type things, different technologies can plug in. I'm using something loosely here, a term loosely. But what I'm saying is once the foundation is there, you can go and, retrofit or put in certain things in certain areas where you need them. They can be permanent in some areas. They can be temporary. You can move them around the city as you need be. You just need to be agile once you have the foundation. And that's what we're doing with special event management in particular. We have the foundation and we're able to deploy resources and connect them into the network as we need them. And people don't know that we're doing all this, and it saves us a ton. And we don't have to try to deploy all that technology all over the city. Similarly, for storm water management, in the summer months, we might go deploying certain sensors in certain areas where we need them because that's when we have the threat, and redeploy them or put other sensors in when we don't have the threat. So there is some agility. There's got to be a scientific approach and a business approach at the same time.
Yeah, I'd follow up on that. I think that where there are standards that have emerged, it absolutely makes sense to take advantage of standards that are going to drive interoperability. But where you're on the cutting edge and you're trying to innovate and trying to be agile, it's important to also be willing to lean forward on that. And it is, in the world of IoT, whether it's smart cities or other IoT applications, it's the only way these things are successful is with a partner ecosystem. And so, picking a set of partners that are clearly making the investment and are supporting that kind of an ecosystem play is frankly what you have to do. Otherwise, if you spend all the time waiting for a standard to emerge, then, and it may be okay, depends on what organization you're in, whether it's a public or a private organization, but you're going to be on the tail end of that curve. You're going to be waiting until all of these things are fully mature before you begin to adopt it. And things are evolving and changing so rapidly. I think it's important for making a bet on public and private partnerships with the right ecosystem players around them that help to evolve the standards in real time.
If I could pick up on what Charles said, he's absolutely right in terms of putting in place that foundation, that communications infrastructure foundation. And if you look at the applications that cities and utilities want to do, for that foundation, big pipes are always better. The more data you can manage, the better. But not all applications require that. So what you're going to find is that no one network really suits all applications. And there's some that require little pipes and some that require medium-sized pipes and some that require big pipes. So what you've got to figure out is, going back to what Greg says, what's the partner ecosystem that can put this mix of technologies together? Some smart city applications like flood control down here are mission critical. If you're trying to get air quality, all across the community with low-cost instruments, you don't need it real time. So you really have to look at the use case, and that helps you define what your network architecture is. But if you've got, let's say, lower RAN networks talking to access points and you're doing fire hydrant pressure, if you can get that access point onto the big pipe, then it's good. You don't need a big pipe everywhere. So again, be cognizant of the use cases and is it economically beneficial or is it mission critical? And that'll help define what your strategy should be.
I think the use case piece is really key. Like you both said, you have to match the bandwidth requirement with the use case. But you shouldn't just look at your own use cases. You should look at industry-wide use cases and who all is investing in which networks. Because maybe in street lighting, we're the big, the most important IoT application, clearly. But there may be a few others in the neighboring rooms that are also important, right? So look at where those networks are investing and who's investing in which networks in those other verticals and domains, because you're going to be leveraging economics of scale here, where you're seeing investment from other people in the ecosystem, whether that's component manufacturers, et cetera. So the costs and the overall robustness and say the number of people spending all day trying to work on cybersecurity for those networks, where are they investing their time? And you want to leverage their time and take advantage of that as a public entity or as a utility. So really look at the other people using those networks and use that as a guide to make your own decisions about where to invest.
I think the compelling argument that lighting has over other IoT applications is that once you convert to LED, you have free power at points all over the building and all over the outdoor.
And networks. If it's unlicensed spectrum, free networks,
right,
for the most part.
Nothing is actually free.
Of course not.
Correct. Right.
So that's
Let's just be clear.
Lower cost of ownership.
Let me ask Greg before you make your comment.
Yeah, I mean,
is that in the absence of communication standards that might drive interoperability, do you see the ecosystems developing their own informal APIs and and true ecosystems within their
Yeah,
domain.
absolutely. I mean, look, the standards develop because typically, if you look throughout the history of standards, they've developed because somebody's been a first mover. They've gotten a certain amount of scale and begun to prove the economic value of doing something in that space. And then people come together and figure out how they want to codify that, and it evolves and changes. And so I'll give an example. And I like what you said, Suzanne, about looking at other parts of the IoT industries for guidance. We did that when we were trying to figure out how are we going to do onboarding of sensor data from customer deployed sensors in an indoor space through the lighting network, right? So we had to put radios into those lights to be able to communicate. And we looked at a lot of different protocols that were being used, and we ended up settling on BLE. And we did that because we looked at what was happening in connected industry and saw that a lot of the sensor manufacturers for vibration sensors and things like that were going to BLE because BLE is in the mobile device, right? And so the first use cases were you send somebody walking through a manufacturing plant and they can connect over BLE to all the sensors that are deployed and download the data on a tablet or something like that. And so, the next step beyond that is, okay, well, can we start streaming that data through a network that's always present so you can get that data going to the cloud in real time and not send somebody out there? So it was the advancements in the industrial IoT space and sensors that were starting to settle on a protocol that we felt was going to win the day that we then adopted into the indoor connected lighting space.
Great. How about planning philosophies? There's a lot of moving parts here to any of these solutions. What?
Why are you doing this? It's not fair.
What do you do first? You want to embark on a smart lighting project. What do you do first as a project initiator or conceptualizer? What do you do first?
The bottom line is everyone's got to look at what their challenges are. What are your biggest challenges? Where are your challenge areas? That should guide you. The next thing is, what's financially feasible? What's the business case? Those are things that you must think of first. And for every community, it is different. All right. So what are your challenges? All right. Where are your challenge areas? All right. And then, what business case is there to be made? All right. Final thing I would say is once you do that, you must be strong enough to be able to share, what's come out of that. Where were your successes? Where were you not so successful? And you've got to be straight with yourself and make sure that you learn from that and just be willing to share that also with your peers. For us, our peers are our neighbors because everybody else wants to share our brand. Our neighbors, they like to share our brand. So we are trying to share this with them to make sure that they copy us. And by copying us, they help us to reach a better scale, right? And they help us down the road by making these technologies, more widely used, and they drop the prices and all that stuff. So there are lots of things, and we can learn from their innovations as well. So I hope I answered.
Oh no, that's great. Cybersecurity.
Jim,
Go ahead.
Just on the where to start. Whoa.
Go ahead.
Stereo.
I know. No, just on the where to start. I wonder if you agree with this, Charles, but we've seen there was a phase of very small pilots kind of that started in the space. And now I think we're seeing cities engage in more extensive pilots that provide more of a representative reality of how something will actually scale. And I find that really interesting and sort of the desire to really sort of not just do the pilot, but do the math for what it would mean at scale and try to build in the learnings required and selecting the right performance metrics as a way to kind of figure out if what they got really was what they wanted. Because I think and this goes hand in hand with picking the priorities. It's how do you pick what it is that's going to matter to you in the end, because it can be different. And it's based on the business case, but it's also based on the overarching goals of that community or that organization. And I think different groups are getting really savvy about what it is that really matters at the end of the day and how to measure it, because that's the key to this.
Exactly, because even before you get to the business case, well, you need your community user needs. Because once you have those needs, you're not going to build a case that doesn't support the needs of the community. But some of those community needs might not be supportable by any business case.
And that's why foundational element number one is most important, stakeholder engagement. Right?
Exactly.
So at home, right, you're constantly having a discussion with your family, your spouse, right? So that when a challenge comes along, that's not the first time they're hearing about it, right?
Chris is laughing.
So it's no secret what the biggest challenges are at home, because you've been engaging everyone in that household, right? And maybe you've been engaging your neighbor a little bit as well about some of the challenges, right? So you have an idea, on an ongoing basis, what the challenges are and how they're shifting. What was the third biggest challenge? What's now the biggest challenge? And so on. So you have to have that ongoing relationship with your stakeholders. And that guides you significantly, so that you're not making these decisions in a vacuum, and that there'll be some buy-in and support when you embark on a course of action.
How about cybersecurity? Would anyone want to hack a street light or an interior light at a store?
Certainly been happening. I don't think, I'll say that I don't think, I'm going to knock on wood here, but I don't think that lights, either indoor or outdoor, are the biggest cybersecurity targets at the moment. There are much higher value things to go after for bad actors. But there's always enough people out there that are going to try it just to try it. And we've seen examples in lighting of people hacking just so that they can say that they did it. I think what's more important for us to think about in the world of connected lighting is that we're connecting those lights as endpoints initially, to monitor and control the endpoint. That's where the lighting control and the energy savings comes from. The next step is the servicing and the asset management, but you're still talking about managing that device itself. And at that stage, the risks are still manageable. But once you start to use this network for doing other things, you put cameras or the examples that you brought up of whether it's homework or whether it's the monitoring of public buildings, is you start to leverage this infrastructure as a multi-purpose network. You begin to now you're delivering value to the organizations that exist in that space, whether those are citizens or whether those are occupants in a building. And it's now you're going from the energy to the space management to the employees to the
to maybe some vital public services that are higher value to a hacker.
Public services. Now you've got a target, right? Yeah. And so back to the idea Charles brought up about the foundation, part of that foundation is ensuring that these networks from the very beginning are secure, that they have, and I think, that's certainly what standards organizations are working on, but it's what, the partner ecosystems are working on as well and challenging each other, because I don't know about you guys, but our customers they're concerned about security, but they don't yet know how to measure us, because this is a new space, right? They're taking things, their IT policies, their IT security policies, and trying to apply it in the world of IoT. And sometimes it applies and sometimes it doesn't. So all of us are working very hard to make sure that anything we put out there is not just thinking about the immediate use case of the lighting itself, but thinking about, 10 steps down the road, what is this network going to ultimately be used for?
Yeah, I'd like your opinion on, if you talk about cybersecurity, and I'm a business guy, I don't understand it too well, but I'm just terrified that, we're securing the networks, but we're not securing the sensors or the controls or the edge devices that they connect to well enough. And they're outdoors, so you can't physically protect them.
This is
You know,
absolutely true.
They can be reached by a ladder or a bucket truck or on the ground, whatever, right? So
If you go 2 doors down, there's a cybersecurity track, and I've come to ARC several years in a row, and in the past more on the industrial side. And the cybersecurity challenges in IoT in general is that we're connecting up things that were never intended to be connected. So they're insecure by definition. And there's not a culture of security in the engineering that goes into a lot of these devices. So, you do have to think about it as an end-to-end system, knowing that there's going to be insecure endpoints. And so what are all the choke points that you can build in at every stage of that connection journey to make sure that if something does get hacked, it doesn't bleed all the way into your core IT systems and give a path to really highly valuable information.
A lot of what happens doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's rare today that any decision is made once you connect something that the IT department for the organization, the municipality, the company that you're working with doesn't have IT involved in it. In fact, our IT department sits in on meetings and joins us so we understand the language. As lighting people, I certainly don't understand the cybersecurity other than if my IT director nods up or down or side to side, that's how I know whether it's good or not. But nothing happens without IT's involvement anywhere in our industry anymore, and especially having an end device that is easily hackable. There does have to be gateways along the process, but when we deal with the Lockheed Martins of the world that are wanting to put connected lighting in their buildings, and their IT people are deathly afraid that someone's going to come in and on their iPhone be able to hack into their network because it's connected to a switch on their server. And they don't want to see that happen. So we have to make sure that there's some level of comfort moving forward, without a doubt.
Yeah. But I think, my experience, again, it's kind of limited. You talk to IT people in cities and they are terrified of this OT stuff. Because they don't have a clue in many cases. So you're right. You want them involved in the cybersecurity issues, but do they really have the expertise to be able to talk intelligently about those endpoint type devices?
So the IT folks are generally accustomed to other operating systems.
Right.
But their thought processes on approaching, cybersecurity matters, those thought processes are very important. They can inform us for our industries that are looking at, new operating systems for our IoT devices. And their ideas can then further inform us on best practices that we should employ based on, their history of, successes and failures. And I think eventually what's going to have to happen is that, as you said before, that as Greg said before, the early folks in some of these industries are going to develop some initial protocols, which then some regulatory group is going to have to get and then constrain the development of all the various operating systems so that we can come up with the equivalent of what we have for our home and office computers, which is subscription services for cybersecurity. Because otherwise, it's going to be unaffordable for all of us.
I just want to highlight something that you just mentioned there, Charles, because you're alluding to the idea that you're updating these devices over the air continuously, right? So even once you've deployed a device, if a company identifies a risk, they want to be able to deploy that patch as quickly as possible. And the protocols around those deployments and the procedures around those need to be codified by the end user and really follow a very specific path of escalation that has to be agreed upon between the vendors and the clients. And establishing those ways of working is what we're doing here, right?
And that's a great avenue for an entrepreneur to go down, developing, the tools to be able to do that. Just like we have McAfee and Norton and all these things right now, there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs to start developing those type tools for these various IoT devices and operating systems.
And they're out there, by the way. There's
Yeah,
some
they
already
are, they are out there. And what's interesting, we talked to one of those type companies out of Israel, and their business model concept is totally whack because they think that, if you've got, let's say, a small sensor that costs $50 to put in, that they can get $2 or $3 a month to secure that. Like, not going to happen. City's not going to pay it. So
Speaking of everyone out
no
there,
reality there.
speaking of everyone out there, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, Charles is happy to take them.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, let me ask, while it's not strictly a lighting networking question, okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's less of a question, just more of a informative comment that there's this set of ISA Iec Standard 62443. It has 14 parts to it, and it addresses cybersecurity of these types of devices. So it's a good starting point. It's not pleasurable reading, but it's standards and codifies hundreds and hundreds of years of subject matter expertise. So I think that's worth looking at.
Thank you.
I'll pass that on to our product management people.
No, I think that there's actually, from related domains, there are a number of similar documents, because I also come out of the intelligent transportation systems domain, and there's no ambiguity in the plug and play and interoperability of a traffic signal, a dynamic message sign, a call box, a toll booth, any of those things. You don't care who it comes from, you plug it in, the data table is there unambiguously. And it comes wrapped with its own cybersecurity, because you don't want a traffic signal showing green on both sides of the intersection. Do you have any questions for each other? Okay, well then let me ask you this. What's the most challenging part of deploying, about introducing what we all believe is such compelling solutions? What are the biggest obstacles, and how do we get over them?
I'm going to bring up one situation. I was sitting with the city of Winter Park that does not charge for parking. And from the previous one, you see a Cloud Park here. But they wanted to deploy parking sensors to be able to create an application that would be able to tell patrons that are coming into this highly affluent town where they can park, where there's openings. And so they got a price on a parking sensor, and I don't know the brand, but there was a subscription rate for the data. And the question I have more towards the municipality is the reasonable rate of return. You said, they're not going to pay $2 or $3 a month for it. They wanted $20,000 a month from Winter Park for the data on their parking spaces, which I heard that and my heart dropped. So I can't imagine what is fair and reasonable the world is going to subscription. What is fair and reasonable?
So what I would suggest is to Winter Park, our neighbors, is that they buy the technology or buy a service that gives them the data. And there is a university down the street, University of Central Florida, that has hordes of students that are looking for research projects to do. And for very little money, Winter Park can contract with UCF to have those students process that data and give it to Winter Park in a form that Winter Park can use.
Don't know if they use UCF, but they did make their own sensor and API for it
Well,
as a result.
But I'm just telling you, I am one of those graduate student slaves. And graduate students are always looking for, or seniors in certain majors are always looking for projects to do. And that is a project that is very mutually beneficial to the university and to cities like Winter Park, especially smaller cities. City of Orlando, which is much bigger than Winter Park, is actually using that model with parking data right now, because we're looking to try to we charge for parking in lots of places. We're looking to try to decide where we should have demand pricing parking, where the demand is very high at times and low at other times. So we're using UCS graduate students to do that for us instead of hiring some big corporation to do that. And that, again, is one of the things that Metro Lab is encouraging, so partnerships with cities and universities to try to, offset the costs of some of these otherwise very expensive things.
Very good.
Good.
So this is a bit of a follow-on to your question. Something that I often hear at conferences, and kudos to everyone here, I have not heard it here yet, is monetizing city data, public data, open data, right? There's this philosophy that's being promoted by certain people that the city can collect data and then monetize it and pay for a lot of what they're trying to do just by selling the data. And I have yet to see an example of that. So your thoughts on the monetization of data, is it really something that cities should be considering and could do? Is there a return on that?
I'll just tell you from the standpoint of trying to commercialize technology that requires data, there's a big battle there, right? I mean, there's a sticker shock reaction from customers, whether it's a public or a private entity, to saying, you came in and exposed data, but it's my data, and now you're trying to turn around and sell it back to me. And I think the emotions of it are really impeding progress, because what's really going on there is it's about whether you're enriching that data with context, whether you're providing some service on top of that data. So I think it's less about data ownership and it's more about right to use in order to be able to advance the industry. And of course, if a company is going to invest in technology and software, et cetera, or people to perform some service doing analytics, they've got to be able to make money off that, or nobody's going to invest and move into that space, and we won't see the technology advance. So I tend to feel like it's, there's some sensitivity with publicly available data. That's a whole nother area around privacy. But when it comes to what's the right price to charge, who owns the data, I think we're letting emotions get in the way to a large degree. Because frankly, again, back to the ecosystem comment, data is going to pass and get transformed in multiple ways as technology makes it more and more available. As we take advantage of these networks and we collect different sensors and we mash things together. And we have to be willing to encourage the private sector to move into that space and produce that technology to deliver the value back to the end customer.
I mean, I've seen one in Los Angeles. I believe, their chief data officer worked on making certain data sets more accessible, so to inspire local entrepreneurs to come up with new businesses. And I think that's where you were going to. And I think that kind of approach is really beneficial, because you're trying to spark the creativity in your own backyard with things that are relevant to your community. So I think those kind of models are really interesting, especially when it's data that's otherwise that's sort of sitting there, for lack of a better word. I think it's really different than this idea of, I'm going to collect your data, now I own it, now, I'm giving it back to you. That's a very different scenario. But I think this idea of sparking innovation as a result of making data accessible that otherwise wouldn't be leveraged, I think is an interesting approach.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so I'll take a last question if we have one. If not, we'll move on to final comments from our great assemble of panelists here. Who wants to go first?
So if you look at smart city projects and even smart and connected lighting, there are a number of animators that need to get together in a collaborative ecosystem to make it happen. And so let's just use smart and connected lighting as an example. So you've got the luminaire manufacturers, and then you have the controller and guys kind of like us, and of course you both have controllers. And then you have the network that these controls are going to run on, and they're either wireless mesh, unlicensed spectrum, or cellular of some sort. And you've got software, and then you have somebody, the city. You've got the utility involved, usually, at least you want them to be involved. And then you have typically somebody's going to do the overall project, the energy service company like Siemens, for example. And so I think one of the biggest inhibitors to having successes is to getting all those people to play together and work together and managing correctly so that there's good, strong project management skills. But last but not least, it's back to the inclusion and the stakeholder involvement. And then the other gap that we see is that, let's say we're working together and we sell Orlando a smart connected lighting project, working with Charles and his team. Oftentimes, the other parts of the city that have to implement it aren't involved. So this stuff just sort of shows, I'm not saying it's happened in Orlando, but it often just shows up, and the public works department or the city workers who're going to deploy it and use it, they don't have a clue because they've never been involved. So I think that's something that my takeaway is you really got to do this planning, this project management, the inclusion of everybody that's involved, all the key stakeholders.
That's why at the City of Orlando, we have a Smart City Steering Committee. And we are putting priority on projects that are, like we'd call the old swingman in basketball, that, can play a little point guard, play some shooting guard, and play some small forward all at the same time. And so we're looking to prioritize funding of projects that benefit 2 or 3 departments at the same time, and trying to make sure that at our Smart City Steering Committee meetings, that we're all aware of what each other is doing. I think we had a great discussion here today. The topic is very relevant, very broad. We almost did a little bit of disservice to interior building lighting, which brings in, all kinds of other things. We didn't talk about it enough. Building technologists people like you, Denise, and so on, may find that there's a whole new group of stakeholders like health professionals and so on who have to be brought into those discussions. So it's almost like a separate topic that needs to be delved into because there's so many other specific issues involved in interior building lighting.
That's a great comment, and we'll end the day with Suzanne and Greg talking about interior lighting.
Well, I guess I just want to bring it back to this idea that light is sort of, at its core, it enables life. I mean, there is no life on this planet without light. And so I think as we all go back to our respective environments, and especially in indoor environments, which we spend about 90% of our time in, think about making it a healthful environment. And lighting, as recent research over the last, relatively recent history, and maybe in my role at the Illuminating Engineering Society, we're really trying to work on these topics around health and well-being, where light can be one of the core enablers of health. And so indoor environments where we spend so much of our time shouldn't be, if you think about outdoor lighting, it's dynamic, the sun is changing, there's clouds, there's climate. Indoor lighting is extremely static, extremely constant, and yet that's not sort of how life is. So I think about how you can use IoT systems and networks to make light more like what enables us to live healthy lives. And that counts for indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, facades, even the light shows in Disney World every day, right? They start and
You're right by
with a light
SeaWorld.
show.
You're right by SeaWorld now, so.
Oh, right. So yeah, we're not going to get out there, right? They've got us on a tight schedule here. But right, that's what enables life. So I think I'll just leave you with that idea that, indoor environments can be healthy spaces, and light is one of the key carriers of generating that health, which in turn has productivity benefits and all kinds of other additional benefits that don't have to come at the expense of energy performance, because we have IoT systems that can manage the performance.
That's true. In the last few years, there's been quite a bit of very substantial research about the spectral amount of light over different spectral power density. And to make a long story very short, blue light has been found to influence your melatonin levels. Melatonin is a cancer suppressant, and also it helps you sleep. So you can affect your mood as well as how well you sleep by adjusting the color temperature of the light that you're related in. This has had dramatic effects for schools for children with autism, in schools for just regular schools of non-afflicted students, for people sleeping at night, for visual acuity of drivers, for the color temperature at Yankee Stadium is, I think, 5,500 K. So there's a lot of adjustments there that can be done with IoT.
So I guess what I would leave you with, I like the way Suzanne kind of brought it back to the indoor space and to health, and the power that light has there. I think the other sort of, if you look back at the history of light, light's also been responsible for developing a lot of technology advancements, right? I mean, you go all the way back to fire, right? Or, you know, to be able to do your homework at night, right? To be able to increase productivity. As we got into the age of electricity, right, the whole electrical grid was put in place to be able to use light bulbs, right? So we're at the edge of a whole new wave of that same kind of advancement, where, you know, everything you heard today, albeit mostly focused on the outdoor space, but equally applicable to the indoor space, is that because of the ubiquity of light, because it's so important to us as a species, it's everywhere. And as the technology is changing and we're networking these systems, we can use that to create a whole new set of benefits that are not directly related to the light. It becomes the carrier for data that can be used for other purposes. And so I think it's a very exciting time. It's complicated, like all of the IoT stuff is that you hear about, you know, at this conference and at others, but it's worth it. And it's worth us pushing through the barriers, the stakeholder engagement, all the things that make these projects hard, getting technology or getting partners to come together that are not used to working with each other, whether that's within a customer organization or it's across an ecosystem. The benefits are going to be worth it. So I encourage everybody to stick with it.
Hey, I'd like to thank our wonderful panel today. I think this was a compelling discussion today. I'd like to thank all of you. And 2 requests. Don't forget to tweet about us at #ARC Forum. And there's a polling function on the ARC application. So please rate this session as well, and rate it highly if you don't mind. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.